start over again. So, yeah, that's the way that's going to go. Let's see. Are we live on Facebook yet? You never can tell with Facebook. Hey, honey.
Yeah.
We're live. We're live on Periscope and Facebook. And let me see if I can find the chat on Facebook. How do I do this? Yeah, you caught a live broadcast. Isn't that awesome? Hey there from Washington. I gotta stop screwing around and get this message out here pretty quick. All right. I'm just having some technical challenges. Hey from South Carolina. Hey from Oregon. What's going on? Oh, we got people on here. Angela Rogers, Teresa Moorhead is on. I would imagine Kazuko will show up eventually. Hopefully Kazuko will show up. All right. So the reason I've called you here is this is Supernatural Saturday. Welcome to Supernatural Saturday. This is a broadcast I do on the second Saturday of every month at 11 o'clock Mountain Time. And for those of you West Coasters, and for those of you people in Arizona, you get screwed up because Arizona doesn't do daylight savings. So in the winter time, I get to be on at 10 o'clock local and 11 o'clock in the summer. I am here to teach you a little bit about the nature of God and the nature of his kingdom. That's my calling. My calling is to teach people about God, about his kingdom, teach people about the supernatural, and we're currently going through my book, Hearing God's Voice Made Simple. I wrote this book, 2014, 2015, I think. 2014, probably. And we're in the chapter on how God speaks through nature. It's an interesting subject to a lot of people. A lot of people say that they sense God, or they feel his presence, or they feel his peace when they're out for a walk, or when they're at the beach, or when they're out in nature, maybe hiking a trail. They sometimes have this sense of awe, the sense of wonder, sense of majesty. Those are ways people describe feeling God's presence, feeling that he is with them. And that is one way in which people can sense God's presence or understand his reality through nature. There are some specific ways in which God speaks through nature, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples today. So years ago, let's see, this would have been probably 2012 or 2013. I was working as a paramedic on the ambulance, and work was pretty stressful. It was very stressful, actually. And I remember one morning driving to work, and I don't have like this super active imagination, actually. My imagination doesn't normally see a lot of supernatural things in the clouds and different things. I'm not very observant about those things. So for me to see something in a cloud formation is unusual. But this morning I was driving to work. I just saw clearly in the clouds around sunrise, I saw what looked like a lion. And I observed it for a few minutes, and it grew just a little bit in size. The clouds were kind of billowing a little bit. And immediately I was impressed with the idea that this cloud was like the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And I felt like God was sort of speaking to me, saying that the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Jesus, is watching over my personal affairs, watching over my affairs at work, and taking care of me and protecting me. And I didn't need to worry about anything. All right, so that's one example of how God can speak to us through nature. Here's another example. Years ago, a woman wrote to me, and she gave me an example of how God spoke to her through nature. She had been debating about whether she should tithe regularly to the church or whether she should give money to individuals who are not like official, recognized church leaders. Just people that had taught her or encouraged her or helped her in her walk. And she felt like the Lord that day told her that you should give the money to people who have encouraged and helped you. So she asked for confirmation. She wasn't sure that was the Lord speaking to her. So she asked for confirmation. She said, "All right, I want confirmation. How can you confirm this?" And then she said another thought popped into her head, and that thought was, "If a deer crosses my path today, I'll know that was you speaking." Right? So she had her little thing, and she went down to a park that day for lunch, and while she was driving, a deer ran across on the road in front of her, stopped. She stopped her car. The deer looked at her for a little bit, wagged its tail, and then took off. And she was like, "Okay, well, that's a little bit weird." And she said, "Now that may not seem strange to most people because some people live in areas where deer are very common." She said she'd been going to that park for 14 years and had never ever seen a deer once the entire time she was going there. Deer were very seldom seen in that area. So for her to see a deer that day, she felt like it was God confirming for her that she should give money to people who encouraged her. And actually, she made a donation to me. Now, I don't talk about this very often on my broadcasts, but Denise and I are pastors of a church. We're pastors of an online church. This is our online church. We do church services once a month. We do them online through Facebook and Periscope. And I get prayer requests from people every day. There's not a day goes by that we don't get messages from people for prayer requests. We get people asking us questions about, one of the interesting things about the political commentaries that I've been doing lately, especially on Q, is we're seeing a lot of atheists and agnostics and people from other belief systems. They're turning to God. They're becoming very interested in God. I have people, at least a couple of people a week, message me on Twitter asking me which version of the Bible they should get. I had an atheist guy, he's a British Anon, messaged me last week, said he'd been an atheist his entire life. And he was messaging me to find out which chapter of the Bible he should start reading. He'd never read the Bible, never owned one. But his involvement in Q had spurred him to start to realize that God is real and he wants to know about God. So he wanted to start reading the Bible. And he wanted to know what chapter he should begin in. So I said, when I was an atheist, I became a Christian. I started reading in the Gospel of Matthew. So I said, some people like the Gospel of John, some like Matthew. Either one is a good place to start. A lot of people don't realize this, but the movement that Q has started is drawing a lot of people to consider God, to consider the reality of God, the nature of good and evil. And I love being able to point people in a direction. Sometimes we do help people with dream interpretation. We help a lot of people with prayer. Prayed for a guy last week who actually had hammer toes. And he asked me to pray for that condition to be fixed. He messaged me a couple days ago and said, "Hey, you're not going to believe it. My toes have straightened out. They're perfectly normal now." He's like, "Praise God." So we do a lot of, we don't do a lot of in-person healing ministry, but we do most of our ministry is done through the internet, through email, through private message. I always respond to prayer requests. I always respond when people are confused or have questions about God. That's my ministry. That and writing books. And we do, just to let you know, we do accept donations for our financial support. We are a nonprofit ministry. We're a 508c1a registered, and we receive donations through our website, prayingmedic.org. That is our ministry website. So if you've never supported us financially and you always wondered, what do you guys do as far as your ministry goes? That's what we do. We have a website, and we do receive donations through there. I publish articles and videos on that website and teaching materials that are available to anyone who wants them. So back to the story. So God can speak to us through nature in a lot of different ways, and I'm going to give you one more example of how He does that. So years ago, my friend Al Mack, who writes the website Northwest Prophetic, he had been receiving a lot of prophetic words from people, mostly based on dreams, some of them based on visions, about changes that were coming in the church. Prophetic revelation people were receiving about changes in the church. And a lot of these dreams and visions that people had involved tsunamis, tidal waves. And he reached out to me and he said, hey, would you ask the Holy Spirit to give you specific revelation on what's coming in the church? And I was like, okay, well, that's weird. I'd written some prophetic words in the past, but I'd not ever requested specific information to write a word on a subject that I was interested in. So I said, okay, I'll pray about it. And I didn't have a dream. I didn't have a vision. I had an experience. So when my kids were young, we used to go to the Oregon coast quite often and the Washington coast. And we used to do a lot of, we spent hours in the freezing cold surf with our wetsuits and our boards. And one day we went to the coast, and it was a full moon. And we were expecting higher than normal tides. Usually when there's a full moon, it has a stronger pull on the tides, so you get bigger waves. And we were thinking, oh, this is going to be great. We'll have really big waves that we can play around in. So on our way there, we're all excited, anticipating what we might encounter. And we get there to the Long Beach Peninsula. And we park the car and we walk out to the beach, and the beach doesn't look like anything we've ever seen before. Everything on the beach was completely rearranged. There was a massive storm surge coming in, and the waves were 20 feet high at minimum. There was a huge build-up, a mound of sand that was right at the edge where the beach meets the grass in the picnic area at this park. This mound of sand was 6 feet high and had never been there before. And it ran the entire length of the beach. There was a dead seal laying on top of this mound of sand. And the kids looked at the dead seal, they got kind of freaked out because they were only like 9 or 10 years old, maybe 11 or 12. And I was like, wow, this is pretty weird. The cove that we normally play around in had been completely transformed. The shallow areas had been dug out of the sand. There was a trough right at the edge of the water. There was this huge mound of sand up by the picnic area. And there were these massive waves, and the kids were kind of freaked out, and I was a little bit freaked out too. I was like, this doesn't even look like the same place we normally go to. So the kids and I talked for a little bit about what to do. They decided they didn't want to go in those waves. Those waves were huge. They're like, nah, I'm good. We'll stay here on the beach. My curiosity got the best of me, so I put on my wetsuit and I went out in the waves. And I tried to catch some waves. I tried to read the waves. I had a very hard time reading them. When a wave would come, I would paddle with it, and there's such a massive volume of water that as soon as I got in the curl, boom, I went to the bottom. It was just the hydraulic action of the waves drove me to the bottom, down to the floor. And then I found out something interesting. I couldn't actually get back up to the surface until the wave had passed over me. The hydraulic action of the wave was like a washing machine. The water was just swirling around, and I couldn't escape it. I would try to swim up, and it would force me back down. So I'm holding my breath, waiting for the wave to go over me so that I could come back up. I did that for about a half hour, and the water was really cold. And I finally said, okay, I'm done. This is enough for me. At one point, I was actually afraid that I was going to die if I stayed out there much longer. The waves were dangerous enough to the point where I'm an expert swimmer, been in the water my whole life. I was done. I wasn't interested anymore. So I went out, swam ashore, and hung out with the kids the rest of the day. And I spent the time thinking about the experience of being at this beach with these waves and a threat to my life. And I wrote a prophetic word based off of the experience with nature. Now, the thrust of this prophetic word was how a lot of people have heard and read prophetic words about coming changes in the church. And we tend to view those changes as all good things that need to happen. There are just a lot of things in the church that need to change. And for people who are disgruntled and unhappy with the way church life kind of goes right now, we're very excited to see those changes come. But we don't necessarily know what the consequences of those changes are going to be. And in the same way that I anticipated big, fun, happy waves where me and the kids could just play in the waves, that wasn't the experience that we had when we got to the ocean. The changes that had taken place on the beach were actually a threat to our lives. And the changes that are coming in the church, some of them, are a threat to the livelihood and the lives of the people who are currently, playing church in a way that doesn't please God. And I think we're going to see changes, and then just what I wrote in the prophetic word, I think we're going to see changes coming in the church that are going to shock people, that are going to wake a lot of people up, that are going to frighten people. And a lot of people are going to get out of the game. They're just playing the church game, and they're going to get out because they won't be able to continue playing the game that they're playing. And God is going to bring changes in the church that are going to be massive and widespread. And it's going to leave some people shipwrecked, basically, if they're not careful. So that, again, is just an illustration of one of the ways in which God speaks to us through nature. And I could go all afternoon and give you more and more examples, but God can speak to us through nature every day. If you're attentive, if you're willing to listen to that still small voice. As I was there on the beach that afternoon, I was just getting these thoughts. They were just thoughts were popping into my mind. And I made note of them and I wrote them down. And for the woman who had the deer ran in front of her, these thoughts just popped into her mind. These were thoughts she would not normally think, right? And that's one of the ways that you know that God is speaking to you, because God's thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. And so when God speaks to us, most often, he's going to put a thought in your mind, that would not normally occur to you. And that was my experience at the beach. I was anticipating that I would write a prophetic word from something. I didn't know what it was. And when I got to the beach, I expected it was going to be great. And it was very different from how I expected. And then the revelation God gave me, based on that experience, was very different from what I would have written. That the difference between our thoughts and God's thoughts is a really good way to know that God is speaking to you. If you know your own thoughts, if you know your own way of thinking, it gives you a big advantage in hearing God's voice, because you can then discern, well, those are my thoughts, that's me, that's how I would normally perceive the situation. This is not what I'm hearing. This must be from the Holy Spirit. Cool? All right. Well, President Trump is going to be going live very shortly, and I am working on something. I'm doing some writing, working on a couple of books and working on an article. And I just wanted to spend a little time with my friends, talk about God, talk about hearing God's voice. I hope this message has encouraged you. Thank you for sharing this broadcast out. And like I said, if you're interested, if the Lord leads you to support us financially, you can support us on prayingmedic.org. Capiche? All right. Love you guys. I will catch you on the next broadcast in about a month. Unless, I'm probably going to start doing more live broadcasts, I think. Maybe doing some live broadcasts on CloutHub. I'm going to pray about that. I had some interesting dreams over the last couple of nights where God is kind of hinting that I maybe need to change up my workflow a little bit. So we'll see where that goes. All right. Take care.